Yeah, we're back. Hi, guys.
If you find dark chocolate a little bitter or overpowering, discover Lindt Excellence. Fine quality dark chocolate is actually balanced, rich, and delicious. Discover excellence, expect delicious.
For me personally, I've been with Dance, part of the family now for many, many years. And I remember the first time I came here, the professionalism, so clean, hygienic.
So tell us where you are and give us a little background where people can find you.
Well,
Yeah, Diane, they must have copyrighted because the copyright warning come up. So I deleted it straight off the bat. So I was going to play a movie on Martin Luther. It's 70 years old, 73 years old. It's black and white. I might play that tomorrow. Would you like to watch that, Di? A movie on Martin Luther and the Reformation? It's not copyrighted because it's over 70 years old.
Website's benjaminbrook.net.
Hey, why are you back?
There's a number of programs. Some of the best podcasts are linked on my website under the radio tab.
Should I do it now, Di?
There's a number of resources you can download for free.
Welcome back, Wyatt.
Co-authored a book on Russia's invasion of Crimea, the purpose of which was to explain to the American people how much a threat Russia really is to the United States at this point, given the imbalance.
It's glaring already. Damn it.
An executive summary of that book is available for free. You don't want to read the entire book. You can kind of catch the genesis of our message by just downloading a PDF off my website. But, I recently published my 7th book, The Day of the Lord Has Come. It's a final warning to the United States that the judgment of God is nigh upon us. We're going to see it.
Di, I'll do that tomorrow. Shawnee, that what I was playing was copyrighted. It didn't come up on the laptop, but it came up on my tablet. They stopped the stream for copyright. So I jumped on deleted. That's why I hung up so quick.
In not too many months. And the book goes into a variety of subjects.
And you know what stinks? He was using Jonathan Cahn's material, iPet Goat material. So he's using other people's material, yet he copyrights his stuff. What a hypocrite.
I'm a financial analyst. I studied international finance. I do business strategy consulting for some of the largest companies in America. One of the chapters in the book is the world at the end of 2022.
Yeah.
One of my largest clients asked me, what should our investment policy be going forward into 2023? And I said, well, that's a complicated question. Let me.
Why? I can't leave my Wizard of Oz decode link anywhere. If I do, they're going to shut me down. They told me that. I used to leave it on sites like this, just the link.
That's in 3 parts. How did we get here? Where are we? And what's coming next? And the chapter on the world at the end of 2022 is where are we? And it addresses all of the fundamental issues that affect the economy, the state of affairs in numerous countries. It uncovers the fraud that's been perpetrated on the nation, and with this entire, green, let's do this green energy conversion. Green energy is a footnote. It's a rounding error in the energy demand of our modern economy. It's a pipe dream. The green pipe dream is what I call it. Anyway, it goes into a lot of fundamentals. The book is initially focused on Bible prophecy. I address the prophecy which Yeshua told us to study as homework, the parable of the fig tree, which he taught that parable to the disciples after going through the discourse of the events that we would witness at the end of the age prior to his return. And then he said, now go and learn the meaning of a parable. For when you see the fig tree put forth its leaves, summer is near. Even so, you'll know that I'm standing at the door. And the generation that sees these things will not pass away until everything is fulfilled. Well, that parable was the only parable assigned as homework of the 40 parables recorded in Scripture, that was the one parable that is really, critical to understanding the timing of the events of the end of the age. And of course, we have to identify two things. One, what is the fig tree? Well, that's Israel, okay? I think probably everybody would accept that. Number two, what's the life of the final generation? And,
he's very articulate, Robert Kennedy Jr., isn't he?
That's where the
good style of a bloke.
debate begins. And of course, people look to Psalm 90. Moses wrote regarding the return of the Lord, just to number our days, that we might apply our hearts to wisdom, and the number of our days should be 70 years, and if by reason of strength they should be 80. And people assumed, well, perhaps that's the answer to the parable. No, those are merely clues. The Lord did not want us to know the answer to the parable until the time.
Okay, guys, I might come back to this. I've just seen something interesting here. It's only an hour old, and it's on Daily Renegade.
What if you could get a new T60 Max Ute for less than $20 a day for ABN holders? Visit your LDP dealer today or go online to check out low weekly repayment options on selected T60 Max models. LDP.
Yeah, Shawnee.
It's very telling why this year 2025 keeps coming up in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think it's incredibly prophetic, and I think we're about to see 2025 is the exact middle of the 9th week. By the time the 10th week starts, the world is already about 300 years into the millennium. Is that veil thinning? Is that restrainer loosening? And does that allow evil agents to bestow upon us technology that we might not have been able to create on our own? By that year, everything will be done, everything will be set in place for the millennial reign of Christ.
Josh, I cannot believe how many things are in the Dead Sea Scrolls regarding 2025 and beyond. I mean, it's absolutely amazing.
Here's another one. She copyrights as well. Josh doesn't copyright. She goes on non-copyrighted shows but copyrights her stuff. I reckon that stinks.
I just did an interview with someone else talking about events that are going to happen in 2025, but you've discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, these are ancient scrolls that are talking about the time that we're living in now and the end times. We will get to 2025 in a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor. There's bad turbulence ahead. The economy is a minefield right now, ready to detonate and destroy the wealth and dreams of the unprepared. Bank failures, de-dollarization, debt, but amidst the chaos, a beacon of hope emerges. Kevin Sorbo, screen legend Hercules, Christian actor, and outspoken activist for the people. With his economic crisis toolkit, crafted in partnership with the experts at Noble Gold, Sorbo is now on a mission to help everyday Americans navigate the coming nightmare. This shock-proof toolkit is your compass through the turmoil, with recession-proof strategies, inflation-busting techniques, and opportunity-seizing skills to help you not.
Yeah, she's close with Tim Moran or Corin, whatever his name is.
Not just survive, but thrive in the bedlam. The crisis threatens to derail your financial future, but you now can stay on track and emerge stronger than ever. And the best part, this shield of knowledge is you.
The best part is we can push it forward and miss it.
We shouldn't even, listen to anything that's in that. We only want to listen to scripture. But meanwhile, Jesus quoted the Dead Sea Scrolls. Can you explain?
Yeah, so what's really fascinating about the Dead Sea Scrolls is we actually do see an instance where Jesus is quoting the Dead Sea Scrolls about himself. So in Matthew 11:2-6, Jesus is talking about what prophecies that the Messiah is going to fulfill. Things like the blind will receive their sight and the lame will walk, lepers are cleansed, things like that. But then he also says that the dead will be raised up. Well, when we look back in the Old Testament, we can find all of those prophecies except for that one. Nowhere in the Old Testament does it say that the Messiah is going to raise the dead. So what's actually happening is Jesus is quoting a Dead Sea Scroll called the Messianic Apocalypse, where it does say that the dead will be raised up from the Messiah. And we know that he's quoting that because all of the apostles seem to have known exactly what he was talking about. Nobody asked, Jesus, where are you getting that from? The Old Testament doesn't say anything about that. They would have been very familiar with this Messianic Apocalypse scroll and the prophecies that were contained within it. So the scrolls are absolutely fascinating. There's a lot of accurate prophecy in there. And I have not found anything in the scrolls that contradict the Bible, and it seems like the New Testament supports at least looking into the Dead Sea Scrolls because it's quoted. They're quoted quite a bit throughout the New Testament.
Now, I've done an interview a long time ago with someone else regarding the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the stuff that you uncovered, they didn't even touch it. They didn't, I mean, it's like you've done this expedition and uncovered amazing things about the end times. Like, I can't believe it. But can you just explain the history of the scrolls?
Yeah, absolutely. So the scrolls come from a time that's often referred to as the 400 silent years in between the Old and New Testaments, and they were discovered. In Qumran in 1947. A Bedouin shepherd was throwing rocks into nearby caves, and he heard something that sounded like breaking pottery. And when he looked into it, he discovered that there were clay vessels that were filled with ancient scrolls, and that's what was discovered in the cave. In the caves. So between 900 and 1,000 parchments were discovered, and they contained sacred writings.
They used a couple of them parchments for firewood at one stage to get a fire going.
In ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. And generally speaking, with very few exceptions, the scrolls were discovered to have been written about 100 or 200 years before the birth of Christ. So this would have been in the intertestamental period between the Old Testament and the New Testament during that 400 years. And this verified dating of the origin of the Dead Sea Scrolls is really important because they contain an amazing amount of detailed prophecy, and we know that they're not faked. And the prophecies have to do with the first and the second coming of the Messiah. It's also important too because there's a lot of rumors going around, especially in college campuses, that the Bible that we have now is changed. Like the Old Testament that we have has been changed throughout the years, and we can't really trust it. Well, since the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we can prove no, like our Old Testament is exactly how it's supposed to be. It was not changed in the Middle Ages at all. And what we have, because the Dead Sea Scrolls contain all the books of the Old Testament except Esther, and then a lot.
Muslims love to say that the Bible's been corrupted.
Of other scrolls as well. So we can go and compare all of those scrolls to our Old Testament and actually see that it lines up. It's completely accurate. And so because of that, and because of the prophecies that are contained within it, the Dead Sea Scrolls are incredibly important, and very thankful that we have access to them in our time today.
So who wrote the different scrolls? And
Great
also, I'd like you to
question.
explain about the Essenes as opposed to the Pharisees. Yeah.
Great question.
So they were written by the Zadokian priesthood, and at the time, and it's funny because when you read the Old Testament, everything in Israel seems to make sense. But then when you start the New Testament, everything's different. They're occupied by Rome. There's Pharisees, Sadducees, and there are Essenes. Now we don't hear the word Essene in the Gospels. That term was coined later by Josephus. But you have these different factions. So basically, what happened during that intertestamental period is Israel, and I go through the whole history in the book, but Israel basically got themselves involved in a bunch of conquests, and they ended up getting occupied by various groups. One of them was Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and we know that from the desecration of the temple and all that. Well, apparently part of that time was Antiochus told the Jewish people, like, okay, well, you can do some of your Jewish things, but
Shawnee, I don't know the 18 Qurans off the top of my head, but there is 18 different, that was what I checked out. There's 18 different versions of the Quran. So, yeah.
But you have to adopt certain things that we want. One of the most important was the calendar. And so the Pharisees and the Sadducees basically stayed behind. Now at this time they weren't all called Pharisees and Sadducees. Those names came later after this split up. But there was a group within the Jewish people that said, no, we're not going to do that. And they first, if I remember right, they first escaped to Egypt and settled there for a little while, and then came back to Qumran. And those were the Zadokian priests. So basically, by the time that you get to the time of Jesus, you have three main interpretation of scripture, three main lines of thought, three main groups that would teach different things. So the Pharisees were really the ones that were in power, and they had their interpretation, which is based on what they called oral Torah. And then you had the Sadducees, who essentially didn't really believe in anything. The Sadducees, like they got so far off that they didn't believe in angels or the afterlife or anything like that, and they felt the best thing to do is just to go along with whatever the government says, so you can have the easiest life possible because there's nothing after this anyway. So that was the Sadducees. And then you had the Essenes. The Essenes were the ones they were found all throughout Israel, but they were the ones that followed the interpretations of the Zadok priests in Qumran. And their interpretation was basically what ours is today of the Old Testament, except that they were still waiting for the Messiah. But they believed in the literal interpretation of the Old Testament. They believed in the prophecies. One other major difference is the Pharisees believed that prophecy did not exist anymore, that God wasn't giving any new revelations or anything, whereas the Essenes believed that God was. And we see that all throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Diane, how many train derailments in the US in the last 3 years? I wonder why they're doing that. They're doing that on purpose. We know that, but I wonder what the motive is.
There's a ton of prophecy in there. Most of it is about Christ, the Messiah's first coming, and then some of it's about the second coming. But it mainly, for them, the next big thing was going to be the arrival of the Messiah, his first coming. And the Essenes did believe in one Messiah with two appearances, that there was going to be a first coming, that he actually would die to absolve our sins, and they even had that written down. There's a scroll called 11, if I remember right, it's 11Q13, and that scroll is really important because they actually write out exactly when the Messiah was supposed to come. And again, this was written a couple hundred years before Jesus. So the Essenes knew exactly when the Messiah would come, what to look for, what he would be doing. But there were these other prevailing thoughts at the time. That's why.
Does your baby need relief from teething pain? Ask your Cherry White Chemmart pharmacist for Nurofen for children. It provides up to 8 hours teething pain relief that's gentle on little stomach. Now just $13.39. Bring back their smile with Nurofen and Cherry White Chemmart, dedicated to care.
Order and pay for 245 kilo LPG
come
bottles
on,
and you'll
ads.
receive a 50% discount on the gas price for your first order.
Master your trading landscape with tools you can trust. Switch to the provider.
That's why when you read through the Gospels, why there are times that Jesus can go into a crowd and like thousands of people immediately get saved before he even really says anything. They just get saved. It's really easy. But then there are other times that he can talk to certain people till he's blue in the face and they're just not budging. That they're willing to say that this can't be the Messiah. He's full of demons. They'd rather blaspheme him rather than accept it. Well, that's the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because the Pharisees believed that the Messiah would be basically a military leader that would lead them in war against the Romans, and so that was the Pharisee interpretation. And then that later, like a different Messiah would come. So you had these two different interpretations. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are the records that were left from the Zadokian priests in Qumran. And so not every Essene in Israel lived in Qumran. They lived all throughout Israel, but they followed the priests that were in Qumran, and they followed their teachings and in their interpretation. So yeah, there's a really rich history there that I get into it really in depth in the book, but it's fascinating to see that, and then to see what's even more mind-blowing is that the Essenes ended up leaving Qumran after Jesus died, was resurrected, and ascended. Sometime after that, because they knew that the destruction of the temple was coming. They knew that this huge persecution was going to happen. So they left their scrolls behind. Well, they took some with them, but they left copies of their scrolls behind in Qumran, and then they left. And there's a big question in academia. They're wondering, like, where did they go? Why did they leave? Like, it's like a big mystery. Well, it's really no mystery at all, because Jesus told them go out, make disciples. I mean, they heard the Great Commission, they took it seriously, and so that's exactly what they did. They obeyed their Messiah. And we as Christians today are the recipients of that. So we actually do come from the Essenes. It doesn't mean that we are Essenes, but we come from that line of teaching, which is just absolutely mind-blowing. And without the Dead Sea Scrolls, we would have no idea.
And it just makes you wonder, like when you were describing that Jesus would go to some places and, you know, they would not even listen to him, and other places they would all just get saved. If those people really were then the Essenes, because they knew what, you know, they knew what to look for with Messiah coming, and as opposed to the Pharisees saying he has to be more of a military figure. So super fascinating. But you were talking about the accuracy in your, it's a 2-volume set and books, and it's really amazing. And it's the accuracy of the Essenes prophetically. Now tell me about the prophetic, the accuracy regarding Herod.
Yeah, so there was an Essene named Menachem, and this was recorded by Josephus. And the Essenes were known for having completely accurate prophecy, and we get that from outside sources as well, like Josephus says that. And I should mention too, in the book, I do have all of what Josephus wrote about the Essenes in an appendix in the 2nd volume. And if people want to get the book, the best place is prophecywatchers.com. And if people get the book, make sure you get both of them, because it's a 2-volume set, and one book won't make sense without the other, so you want to get both. But anyway, so there was an Essene named Menachem, who, when Herod was basically in school, when he was very young before he was king, Menachem gave Herod this prophecy that he would be king, and basically it would start off all right, but he would end up getting really corrupt and end up being a really terrible king over time. Well, Herod at the time wasn't even looking for anything like that. Like he wasn't, he didn't know that he was going to be king. He wasn't set up to be the king of Israel or anything like that. But over time, that, as we know, that ended up happening. So Herod called Menachem back back to have another conversation with him and ask him, okay, well, you were right about this prophecy, so how long do I have? And I forget the exact number that Menachem said. I think it was like 35 years or something. But when you do the math, he was right. And then reiterated again that he was going to end up becoming corrupt, which that absolutely did happen. And Herod had a terrible end to his reign. So that's just one small example of how accurate the prophecies of the Essenes were. And we actually see that same Essene later in the book of Acts, and I believe it's Manaheim or something like that. Manaheim, I think it's translated as that in Acts. But when you actually go back to the original language and look at who this guy is, it's that same Menachem guy. The Essenes lived a long time. They lived almost twice as long as
Yeah, Shawnee, but we know men can't have babies.
The Pharisees and the Sadducees as their contemporaries. Because the word Essene actually just means healer.
Diane, I saw a photo of the parents, and they do look like the parents, not Obama.
So, apart from their interpretations of the Bible and the prophecies, they also knew how to. They had a lot of knowledge about natural cures and natural healing and stuff like that. And Josephus records that as well. So because of that, because of their diet, probably also because of the area that they lived in, they lived to be over 100 years old most times, like around 120. So they had extremely long lifespans as compared to the Pharisees and Sadducees. So that's where that word Essene comes from. It just means healer. But so that's just one prophetic example of many. But it's fascinating.
It's absolutely fascinating. Now, I want to go to the solar calendar. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you. When I first was reading about it in your series, in your book, on your books, I was like, what? Solar calendar? And I mean, because I've just been taught that it's the lunar calendar and Rosh Kodesh, that Kodesh meant, the new moon, but it's not that. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have been so off on the true calendar. So explain the solar calendar.
Yeah, definitely. So the Essenes had, so there were basically two calendars that were being used during the time of Christ. There was the calendar that the Essenes were using, and then there was the calendar that the Pharisees were using. And when Antiochus, when that whole thing happened, that was part of the deal that I mentioned earlier. Antiochus wanted the Jewish people, the Jewish leadership, to accept his Seleucid calendar. And it's interesting because when you look at the lunar calendar of the Pharisees that they had, and you compare it to the ancient Seleucid calendar that Antiochus would have had, they're identical. And so the Jewish people that would become the Essenes, that would become known the Essenes, at the time they said no to that, and they wanted to keep their calendar because. And what's really interesting is in the book of Jubilees, which was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was a prophecy about this, where God even said, there's going to be a time where, I gave you the solar calendar, and there's going to be a time you're going to abandon that for a lunar calendar. And God was saying he was against that. And that ended up happening. Well, at least the Pharisees and Sadducees, they made that deal, but the Essenes didn't. So the whole idea of the calendar, the Essenes believed that God gave Adam a solar calendar. And not only is it a yearly calendar, but it's also a calendar that describes all 6,000 years of human history and the 1,000-year Sabbath. So according to the Essenes, there would be 7,000 years of this current creation before a new heavens and new earth. And we know that from the book of Revelation and stuff, that they were talking about that well before Revelation was ever written, before John was even born. And so the way that their calendar worked, it was based on the sun.
I seen photos of it in the army, or the Marines it was.
And the reason that they said it was so important for them to keep their original calendar is because they knew that if they did the feast days wrong, if they did the festivals wrong, especially if they did it on the wrong day, a priest could get killed for that. We see examples of that in the Old Testament where priests don't handle the festivals exactly correctly, and they end up dropping dead because of it. And it was really important. And the way that the Essenes taught is that the reason that's the case, the reason it's so important is because the earthly temple is a shadow of the heavenly temple. So while certain rituals are being performed in the earthly temple, at the same time, angels are performing certain rituals in the heavenly temple. And we actually see examples of this in the Bible, such as Revelation 8, when the angel has the censer of incense and stuff. Well, when you look at the details of that, that's the Day of Atonement ceremony. Now that's the heavenly one. They're not, in the heavenly temple, angels aren't sacrificing animals or anything like that. We're not given a whole lot of detail about what the angels are doing, but we have a little bit of detail. But on earth, people are sacrificing and praying and doing all this stuff while the angels are performing their heavenly duties as well. And those are supposed to happen at the same time, which is interesting too, because that means, according to the Essenes, time runs the same in heaven as it does earth, which actually makes a lot of sense. But so they wanted to keep the rituals and the festival days exactly on the days that they were supposed to. So they kept the solar calendar and eventually moved to Qumran, and they kept doing their stuff there. So there's a lot of prophecy that can be found in that calendar, not just the year calendar, but just the idea of how they split up this long 7,000 year period. And it's interesting too, because we can go back to the ancient church fathers, and they taught as well, because they got this from the Essenes. The Essenes took the Great Commission and went and made disciples, and some of those disciples are what we would call the early church fathers. And a lot of them talk about how there's going to be 6,000 years of human history and then 1,000-year Sabbath, just like there's 6 days of a week, and there's a Sabbath after that on the seventh day. And then after that, everything would be recreated. There would be a new heavens and new earth. So the church fathers got that from the Essenes. Well, they also split up this time period into certain segments. So the way that we have, years and centuries and millennia, they had Shemitahs, which was a 7-year period. Then they had Jubilees, which was a 50-year period. they had onas, which is a 500-year period, and then they had ages, which is a 2,000-year period. And in their view, there would be it's four. They would call it 4 ages, but it's basically like 3.5. So there would be from the time of creation till the call of Abraham. That's the first age. It's the first 2,000 years, and that's called either the age of creation or the age of chaos. Then the second one, the age of Torah, started at the call of Abraham and went until 75 AD. So just a few years right after the temple was destroyed. And then according to the Essenes, the last age would be from 75, or the church age. The last age would be the millennial age. But
hey, boss, I missed you
they
there.
actually call it the age of grace, which is amazing that they even called it that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Again, 200 years before Christ was born. But they said that would last from 75 AD to 2075 AD. Now, what's really interesting about that doesn't necessarily mean, if the Essenes are right, that we have to wait until 2075 for Christ to return. That's not exactly what that means. So while these time periods, you can basically set these time periods in stone, you can't really set the events that occur in stone. So for example, the final Jubilee, the final 50 years of the Age of Torah was between 25 AD and 75 AD. Well, think about Jesus' ministry. That was really early on. That would have been from 29, somewhere around 29 AD to 32 AD. It would have been somewhere around there. Would have been the ministry of Christ. Well, that is really early on in that final Jubilee of the Torah age. The Torah age didn't end until 75 AD, and it's not that a certain event happened in 75 AD that caused anything. It was just that was the time where the next age was to begin. So a lot of prophecies had to be fulfilled in that time. Well, and you see this at the end of each age too. You see like the final Jubilee, there's a lot of chaotic stuff and a lot of miracles. So the end of the age of creation was the whole Tower of Babel incident. The end of the age of Torah was the first coming of Christ and everything. And a lot of those prophecies were wrapped up well before the age of grace technically started. So we could see that again in our time. We could see we're going to be hitting 2025. Technically, because the calendars are a little, the Essene calendar is different from our Gregorian calendar. Technically, the beginning of the final Jubilee of our age would be early to mid-March of 2026, technically. But suffice to say, I make a note of that in the book, and then I say, it's just really a lot easier to say like 2025 because that's like where everything's wrapping up, because 2025 to 2075. But we could see a similar thing that we saw in the Age of Torah. We could have all of these prophecies, including the tribulation and everything. We could have that happen early in our final Jubilee. I mean, that could happen next year. That could happen in a few years from now. We don't have to wait all the way till 2075. Now, Jesus could do that. He could decide that he's going to wait till 2075. But all it means is that by the year 2075, 2076, everything should be in place.
Huh? Where's what?
For us to start
the
millennial age, to start for Christ to start his millennial age. And think about all of the things that need to be fulfilled. It's not just we have a 7-year tribulation, Jesus returns, and then that's it. There's still a lot of things. When you read the end of the book of Ezekiel, there's a brand new temple and a brand new city. How long is it going to take for that to be built? Well, the temple of Herod took about 40 years. And I don't think that Jesus is just going to come down and again just snap his fingers and a temple and city are going to appear. I think that's going to need to be built. And so if that takes 40 years, well, you subtract that from 40 or 50 years, you subtract that from 2075 and you end up really early in our final Jubilee where Jesus would return. So a lot of times when I talk about this, especially on my channel and other interviews and things, when I give that 2075 date, a lot of people get deflated because they're like, oh no, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to survive to 2075. And I say, look, it's okay. Like Jesus could come back. Like a lot of things can happen earlier on. And you can have, all the judgments of Jesus that gets performed when he returns. You can have all that stuff, and then you can still have decades where things need to get set up. How long does it take to notify the whole world of how things are now? Jesus is reigning, and emissaries from nations are expected to come to tabernacles, and and people have to beat their swords into plowshares. Like, how long does it take to get the whole world up on these new rules? It's not going to be overnight. And then again, especially with the new temple and the new city, and I take that totally literally in Ezekiel. That stuff takes time. So I believe it's very likely that we will have like the tribulation and all this stuff. And I'm not going to set a date to it, but I would expect that it would probably happen pretty early on in our final Jubilee, which would be from 2025 to 2075. I don't know exactly what year or anything, but probably pretty early on. Then when Jesus returns, takes some time to clean it. It's going to take some time for people to clean up the earth. It's going to take some time for all of there's like 4 different judgments that happen at that time. It's going to take some time to build all this stuff and basically get the world ready for the millennial reign, so that by 2075, by that year, everything will be done. Everything will be set in place for the millennial reign of Christ. So to me, that's really exciting. We're living in prophetic and very exciting times.
Absolutely, yeah. When I first, saw the end of the age being at 2075, yes, I was one of those people too that went, oh no, with everything that's going on, oh my goodness. And then I would be 1,000 years old by then. So anyway, yeah, but when I saw the pattern of what you were talking about, like at the end of the second age, the age of Torah, that Jesus, he died and was resurrected towards the beginning of that Jubilee, which was, so it wasn't at, if it was at 75 that happened, then I'd be like, look at that pattern. But it was the beginning of that, and then I went, it's like, okay, great. Now I've got to ask you, Josh, some people are going to say, oh, I really want to get on that calendar. I want to know where I'm at. So but where could they see that so they could know, okay, we're this day as far as the Gregorian, but where am I on the solar calendar? So
yeah. So my very good friend Dr. Ken Johnson has developed a free website. It's called dsscalendar.org, and you can go to dsscalendar.org and you can look up any date that you'd like, and you'll get the Gregorian date. So you'll get our date, but then underneath it, you'll also, or right on top of it, like you'll also see the Dead Sea Scroll calendar and what things happen on that date. So, you could, if something major happens in Israel, you can go to that website and look at that date and see if it falls on a festival day or something like that. Also, we have a print version of that, which a lot of people prefer the print version because they can just look at their wall and do it. But we have a wall calendar available, and you can find a link to that at either my website, dailyrenegade.com, I have it right on the homepage, or Ken Johnson's website, biblefacts.org, and I think it's in the store. But if you scroll down, if I remember right, it's right there on this page. But we have print like a wall calendar where on the top you get the normal date with our normal date, but then on the bottom you actually get to see the Dead Sea Scroll date and dates, and you can compare the two. And what's really great about that too, like when I was writing the book, I was trying to figure out a lot of stuff from Revelation, because this is the calendar that the Bible uses. When you go from anywhere from Genesis to Revelation, when you see anything that says, on the 3rd day of the month or on this month, you can track that down with this calendar and actually see, oh, that's why they made mention of that date. It's on, the Festival of New Wine or something like that. Well, you can do that with the prophetic day counts as well. And for me, it's a lot easier, instead of clicking around on a website, it's a lot easier for me to just have the print version and then just do the counts. And what's great is with the Essene calendar, all their months are exactly 30 days. And then they had what was called a leap week to make up for that. But it makes counting really easy. So if you want to figure out when the 5 months of the locusts in Revelation might be, you can actually count that out, and you can actually figure it out. It's really interesting because we have this calendar now. We know that 5 months, it's between the days of the Day of Atonement, which I believe that's when the abomination of desolation is going to occur for a lot of reasons that I do get into in the book. But it's the 5 months between that date and then Purim, which is 5 months later. And why Purim? Well, Purim is a Jewish celebration where they'll go out on the streets and they'll celebrate, and it's from Esther, and they give gifts and stuff. Well, I remember when I was a kid, I would read Revelation and I would read about the two witnesses, and it says that when the two witnesses were killed, the Jewish people they were out in the streets giving each other gifts, and I thought that was really weird because like I get celebrating, according to these unrepentant people, these two witnesses would have been like terrorists to them. So I understand why they would want to celebrate, but giving gifts, like I remember when Osama bin Laden was killed, and yeah, America celebrated that, but we didn't give each other gifts. It's just a weird thing. Well, that always stuck with me. And then when I learned about...
Think about it, guys. The two witnesses, they got to show up any day or any week now. They can't be much further away. I reckon when Israel goes into full-on war, that's when they'll show up.
What Purim was like, oh, it makes sense. That happens on Purim. So you can actually track this down with this calendar and say, like, okay, the abomination happened. Happened on the Day of Atonement, and it has to, because the ceremony that's involved that's happening, and even in the heavenly temple in Revelation 8, that's all Day of Atonement rituals. And so the abomination of desolation happens on the Day of Atonement. Right after that, right when that happens, the locusts are released. There's like an asteroid and locusts are released. I believe those first few trumpets are pretty consecutive, like within probably a 2 or 3 day period. And they're allowed to torture unsaved people for 5 months. Well, then you get everything with the witnesses, and when you do because we know that the witnesses, their ministry lasts for I think it's 1,260 days. I have it in the book.
Yeah,
so you can actually pinpoint right when their ministry starts, and it's in the beginning of the tribulation. There's a big debate on that in Christianity. Do the two witnesses start their ministry at the beginning of the tribulation or the second half of the tribulation? It has to.
I always thought the beginning, to be honest.
Be the first half, because if it's the first half, everything lines up. If it's a first half with a leap week, all of those day counts line up perfectly. But if it's the second half, it doesn't match up with the calendar at all. So those are just like a couple of small examples on how you can use this calendar, and not only for prophetic things, but for historic things too. You can map out exactly when the flood of Noah happened. You can map out like Moses' ministry on the mountain and when all that happened. And I do that in the book. So having a print version of this calendar is really helpful, because you can take that right along with your Bible, because it's the same calendar that the Bible uses. And any time that there's a date given, or so and so days of whatever month, you can look that up and you can see exactly what it is, and you can even map out prophecy that way. So yeah, again, the calendars are available at dailyrenegade.com or biblefacts.org, and if you just want the website, the free version, it's dsscalendar.org.
We're going to get into more of the Dead Sea Scrolls and how another way in the Dead Sea Scrolls points to around 2025, which is crazy. And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to my channel, put a like on it, and also share the video. Josh, your information is so very interesting. Now, as far as the calendar, before we go on to another way of measuring time, with the solar calendar, like, okay, if we think that Rosh Hashanah is in September, how far off is it?
Yeah, a lot of those festival and feast days are different on the Essene calendar. But I will say, though, because a lot of people...
Okay, it's glaring. I don't know why. Hang on.
What calendar should we be following? because that's not exactly right. This was something for Israel. Now we can look at these calendars and see if anything prophetic happens on certain days. But there were dates on the Pharisee calendar as well, the lunar calendar, where Jesus did fulfill them on those dates. And the way that I look at it is, Jesus will meet you where you are. And I think that that's what he was doing. So we do see fulfillments definitely on the Essene calendar for sure, by and large, but Jesus even took time to fulfill some of what was expected on the Pharisee calendar as well. So yeah, there are feast days that are totally and wildly different on the Essene calendar, but then again, according to the Essene interpretation, they believe they had the correct days, where when they did these rituals, they did these festivals, these feast days, that those were the exact same days that the angels were performing their duties in the heavenly temple for that day too. So the way that I look at it for us today, it's like, well, the vast majority of us, not all of us, but the vast majority of us are Gentile believers. So we're not beholden to, we're not required to follow any calendar really. But I look at it more as a point of study. It's really interesting. You can find prophetic things in there that might lend some clues as to what's coming, what's ahead, what to look for prophetically. But I think there are times that you can find that on the modern Jewish calendar as well, because, like I said, again, even during Jesus' ministry, he fulfilled things on both calendars. More so on the Essene calendar, but he did fulfill things on both. So I don't have any problem with somebody who wants to look at the modern Jewish calendar and try to figure out if something's happening there. Very, very well could be. So I say check out both calendars. I think they're both interesting. And also look historically at what things have been fulfilled on each of these calendars and just compare the two. And so, yeah, I encourage people to do that.
Okay, now I'd like you to explain with the Book of Enoch another way of measuring time. I found this absolutely fascinating, of the 10 700-year periods. Yeah, can you explain?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this is really interesting. So in the Book of Enoch, it's chapters, I believe, I have it in the book, I think it's like 93 and 96 or something like that. I have it in the book and I lay it all out. But Enoch, he's got a different way of splitting up these time periods. Now, he would have still adhered to the solar calendar. This is more of a prophetic way of dividing up the same amount of time. So it doesn't conflict with the solar calendar. They went by the solar calendar. They didn't necessarily go by this calendar. It's not even really a calendar. It's what Enoch was doing was splitting up the times a little different into 700-year periods, where essentially every day is 100 years in this 7,000 year time period. So he split the 7,000 year time period into 10 different sections of 700 years, and he gave a prophecy for each of those, for all 10. And again, the latest that people can say that this was written, the absolute latest, would have been around 200 BC.
Wow.
It couldn't have been written any later than that. So I think actually Enoch's a lot older than that. What we have are copies, but let's just say that 200 BC date is accurate. That's the latest that Enoch could have been written, including this prophecy. So you can get up to about the 5th or 6th week, and you could say, well, of course, that's all history to somebody who's living in 200 BC. But then after that, you can't really say that anymore. I mean, in the prophecies, I mean, you have the Protestant Reformation described in there. Obviously, you have the Great Commission, people becoming Christians. But what's really interesting about it is where we are in that time. So we would be in the 9th week, and he calls these
I don't know why it's glaring.
700-year periods, where every day is 100 years. We right now are in the 9th week out of 10, and we are smack dab in the middle of it. 2025 is the exact middle of the 9th week. And what the prophecy says about the 9th week, it says that this is the time where the judgment of the angels is going to happen, where the vanquishment of evil is going to happen, basically the return of the Messiah. That's what this week is known for. So when we, and then the 10th week is all about the millennium and stuff, because by the time the 10th week starts, the world is already about 300 years into the millennium. So it's all about that. But so, we might ask, well, why would we look at the middle point of that week? This whole prophecy it has a certain structure to it that's called chiastic. It has a chiastic structure, meaning it's like a palindrome. So the first week and the 10th week relate to each other in some way. They're structured similarly. And so in the first week, it talks about in the 7th part of that week, this and this is going to happen. And then in the 10th week, it also talks about the 7th part. You don't see that in any of the other ones. Now, in week 2, it says something, it refers to something about in the middle of that week in 2. Well, with this chiastic structure, the pair of week 2 would be week 9. That would be us. So that's why we look at the middle part there, and we would say, okay, somewhere around the middle, we should expect this to happen. And it's not an exact. I mean, 2025 is the exact date. That's the middle of this week, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those events are going to happen on exactly 2025. It's just somewhere around the middle. Like in the second week, it talks about the flood, and it talks about Noah, and his birth was 6 years off from the exact middle point, but it's still generally the middle. So that's why we can't be too exact when it comes to exact dates. It's more generally around that time. So generally somewhere around the time of the middle of the 9th week, we should see the tribulation, we should see the return of the Messiah, we should see the judgment of the angels, all of that stuff. And so we're right there. We're a few years, according, if this is right, we're a few years away from that. And then you have the rest of the weeks in the middle. They don't give any kind of time signature for what part of the week to look at. They're just general. In this week, this and this happens. But to me, the most fascinating part of that prophecy is seeing that, again, that date, 2025, 2026, that comes up again, even in this other prophetic time count that Enoch writes about. And it points again to really the time period that we're living in now. So I would expect something significant in the next 2-3 years. We should start seeing some more prophecies being fulfilled. We're already seeing that. I mean, we've been seeing that since Israel became a nation again. So in a way, that's nothing new. But that should increase, but also miracles and things like that. We should see an increase in that too. Also, unfortunately, a big increase in apostasy, because that was another big marker for the end of the last jubilee of an age. Is there's massive apostasy. We clearly saw that at the end of the age of Torah with the Pharisees and everything. I mean, they killed Jesus, so that's obviously there's an apostasy happening there. But also at the end of the age of creation with the Tower of Babel, that's an apostasy. So and then when you look at the world today, we live in a world here in 2024, 2025. In our time today, we live in a time that I think sometimes we take for granted how weird it is, how weird it is that the world works the way it does. The world has never worked like this before with all this technology and everything that we have now. We take it for granted because we're born into it. But think about it. It really was not that long ago that we were in horse and buggies. And now we're shooting rockets, into space, and we have orbiting satellites, and everybody's connected through the internet, and it's just a completely unprecedented time. And when you think about it, there's no reason that it had to be our time where that could have happened. The Greeks could have done that. They had the same math. They had the same materials, raw materials. They had the same intelligence. They could have created an automobile. They could have had an industrial revolution. There's no reason why they couldn't have had that. But I think something was restraining that. And I think that restrainer, I think the veil is kind of thinning now. And it's allowing a lot more of these things to happen. Another thing from the book of Enoch, we read that when the 200 watchers fell, they essentially gave a type of technology to mankind that they didn't have. And it was, through war and things, cutting of roots, astrology. But they didn't have access to that before, and they gave them that. So that makes me wonder if the veil is thinning, if the restrainer is loosening, whatever however we want to define that. Is it easier for fallen angels to provide mankind with, maybe not like swords and cutting of roots like it was before, but now, microchips and technology and the internet. And I'm not, my daughter came in to say hi. Hey, okay, I'm doing an interview, sweetheart. I love you. Go see mama. Sorry about that. It's totally fine if you wanted to leave that in there.
It's totally
she does
fine.
she does it in a lot of my videos. But anyway, yeah, she's adorable. She's my whole heart. But so just thinking about, like, is it possible that we've now in this time, where it absolutely could have been possible to do this before, but now in this time, because we're getting so late into our church age, into our age of grace, is that veil thinning? Is that restrainer loosening? And does that allow evil agents to bestow upon us technology that we might not have been able to create on our own when when the veil is more in full effect? And I think that's very likely, because how else do we explain just how weird and different, and how much it changes year by year? I mean, I was born in the 80s, and even that was pretty technological compared to the rest of the world. But it's a totally different world today than what it was. I didn't have the internet when I grew up. We didn't have tablets. Cell phones weren't a thing. Cordless phones were just starting to become a thing, but everybody still had a landline. And today, I didn't have a computer. I had a typewriter. But today, it's after 40 short years later, it's a totally different world, and it's getting so advanced I can't even keep up with it. Like my kids are able to. My 5-year-old is able to, like, do stuff on her tablet, and it's like, how did you even learn how to do that? Like, how did you learn how to find that app? And we're careful with it. There's all sorts of protections and stuff, and she just has like kids teaching apps and stuff. But she's able to log in. She's able to put her passcode in. Like, it's like I never would have been able to figure that out when I was 5 years old in 1989. So it's
out here, good enough is never enough. That's why Mack is setting the standard once again. A new 780 horsepower engine makes our Mack Superliner and Titan the most powerful conventional.
It's just crazy to think about. So I think that it's very telling why this year 2025, 2026, why this time period that we're living in keeps coming up in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think it's incredibly prophetic, and I think we're about to see a lot of crazy stuff, both good and bad, in our near future.
No, I totally agree, and I think it's interesting that the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, a year before Israel became a nation, which, that Israel becoming a nation is just a key to Bible prophecy. And also back to the those weeks, when you were talking about like week 2, that coincides with week 9, which we are in week 9. And again, that in week 2, because you talk about each thing in your books of the weeks and what happened, and it's like prophetically. I mean, when you look at week 7 and week 8, you're just gonna have to get the books to see what happened. But it's like, oh my goodness, yes, that happened in history. So but it was written before that. And so, but week 2, which you said coincides with week 9, is Noah's flood, the events leading to Noah's flood, and the great wickedness caused by fallen angels mating with human women. But Jesus said, just like in the days of Noah. So
that's right.
Right.
Really
so
good point.
Yeah. So it's like really, really crazy, because it's coinciding with week 9, and like you said, the fallen angels and technology, which of course, the whole Roswell thing started. We started seeing, more evidence of the fallen angels, with the what they call UFOs.
And I've wondered that too. Talking about the technology, is it possible these? I know this is a little off of left field, but I've written about this as well. These spaceship crashes, is that just fallen angels giving us technology? Because when you look at that, it was about that time that we started seeing a lot of advancements in technology, far surpassing anything that came before. And so I wonder, are these crashes deliberate? Is this actually fallen angel technology, and they're basically just throwing them down to Earth to give us this stuff, so we'll use it really to our own destruction? And I think that's very likely.
Okay, or we probably could talk forever on this. Yeah, I mean, like, I just like feel like, World War II and then Hitler. I mean, I think that he was in contact with these fallen angels. And,
Yes.
I actually believe that the Nazi scientists had technology from the fallen angels because it was just, and then when they came over to, the United States, what is that, Operation
Paperclip.
Paperclip, yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
So it's like, wait a minute, how did you even know how to do that kind of
Okay,
stuff?
Shawnee, God
It was
bless.
very,
Good
very
night.
evil, which, you would expect from the fallen angels.
Night,
So it's like,
Wire. God bless,
okay,
girls.
yeah, no, like you said, it just started really advancing. All of this technology kept on advancing and advancing. So it really shows the time that we're living in, but then it shows that Jesus is coming back soon.
Amen. I totally agree, and that's basically the crux of the whole 2-volume set, is showing that even if we're wrong about the calendar, even if we're wrong about these dates, because I don't set a date in the book. I don't actually at the last part of the book I tell people, if I were a betting man, I would say 2025 is going to come and go and nothing's going to happen, because every time somebody tries to predict something, it doesn't happen. So I don't predict anything in the Bible or in the book from the Bible. I don't predict any specific date, and I tell people, don't sell your house, don't max out your credit cards, don't make any big life changes. But the main thing is, even though we don't know the day or the hour, we don't even know the year, we can kind of gauge the season, I think, and that's a broad general term. It doesn't mean any particular amount of time, but we can just kind of gauge the season that we're in. And so the main message of the book is that even though we don't know exactly when, Jesus is coming back soon, very soon. Just look at the season that we're in and what's happening. We can't pinpoint the exact day, but Jesus is coming soon. So now is the time, if you haven't already, to get right with Christ. Now is the time to accept Jesus as your Savior, if you haven't already. Now is the time to start praying. If you're saved and you just don't pray,
Thanks, Wyatt.
Christianity isn't a part of your life, but you're technically saved because you believe in Jesus. Well, now's the time to really start living for Jesus and start dedicating your life to him. Just going to heaven, that's great, but that's not enough. The Bible teaches that there are going to be people who go to heaven and they have no rewards, they have no status. You have powerful leaders who are rich in this world who, they may be saved, they may have gotten saved, but they're not living for Christ, they're living for themselves. Well, Jesus said that basically the greatest on earth, they're going to be the least in heaven. Somebody who's living a life just on their own, without Christ, even if they technically believe in Jesus and they've accepted that gift of salvation, well, when they get to heaven, they're not going to have any rewards, and they're going to be least in the kingdom of heaven. So, and we all need to think like that too. Like, every day, am I living for Christ, or am I living for myself? Every decision we make, we should be thinking that, and especially because given in light of all these prophecies, not only in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but just in the Bible as well. And we take that for Holy Scripture. I don't take the Dead Sea Scrolls as the inspired word of God for our time or anything. And I get into all that in the book. It's really great history, accurate prophecy. But if people are turned off to the idea of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we'll just look at your Bible. That is the Holy Word of God, and that tells us the time that we're living in, that the time is getting short. So, now is the time to be dedicated to Christ more than any other time, because, again, Jesus is coming soon.
Absolutely, and Jesus said that we should not be ignorant of the times and the seasons.
That's right.
Josh, thank you so much. Can you tell people where they can get the 2-book series, two books, and your website?
Absolutely. So the 2-volume set, it's called Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the absolute best place to get it is prophecywatchers.com. Make sure you get both books, because one won't make sense without the other. So prophecywatchers.com, the best place to get it. Now, I will say, if somebody wants an audiobook, or if they want the Kindle version, that is only available on Amazon, so they'd be able to find that there. And then my personal website is dailyrenegade.com, which is a place where I house all of my videos, most of which I can't put on YouTube because of censorship issues. We've had videos deleted, we've had entire channels deleted. So I created Daily Renegade as a place, and I talk a lot about Dead Sea Scrolls and prophecy. I mainly focus on prophecy, and I've got a ton of videos about it. Magnetic pole shifts, and just all sorts of things. So if you're into prophecy, you'll love Daily Renegade. It is a membership platform because it's not. I didn't want to run it like a 501c3 because I don't want the government telling me what I can and can't say. That's the whole point of Daily Renegade, where you can go on there, you can comment on videos. There's a community tab that works a lot like Facebook. You can say whatever you want. We can all fellowship with each other as long as you're not being rude or being a troll. But it's a great place to fellowship, and all of my complete videos, I usually only put the first half of my videos on YouTube and then point people to Daily Renegade. But they're all available in full at Daily Renegade with even my my show notes, with the notes that I used.
Okay, guys, I might switch to some redacted and finish off with that. I'm not comfortable with prophecy with Stan anymore. I think he's too out there.
Well, just a few minutes ago, we got some unbelievable economic numbers. The U.S. leading economic indicators have plunged for the 29th month in a row. It's worse than COVID lockdowns. And right now, the Democratic National Convention kicking off in Chicago, where you will have Democrats and Kamala Harris trying to distance themselves from Bidenomics, pretending that they had nothing to do with the last 3.5 years of government policies, which have gotten us here. Skyrocketing inflation, of course, prices up over 20% for just about everything in your family, from gas prices, of course, to food on your table, to rent, to electricity, to energy costs. It's been a disaster, but they're telling you that, hey, when Kamala Harris is elected president, all of that will go away. Right? But she's in power now, so it really doesn't make much sense. Right now, we're also swimming in massive amounts of credit card debt, and the United States, average Americans right now have used up almost all of their savings. Really, really troubling. On top of all of that, the Federal Reserve is meeting right now in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, to discuss inflation, to discuss interest rates being slashed. So a lot of economic.
This is 7 hours old.
News that we want to sift through today right now on the economy. And for that, someone who's deeply plugged into what's happening with the US dollar, what's happening with inflation, what's happening with precious metals, and all of it is Kevin Demerit. He is the CEO of Lear Capital, and he joins us. Great to check in with you, Kevin. Great to see you here on the show.
Yeah, great to be on the show, Clayton.
Well, you're here at an interesting time because tonight, Monday, we've got the DNC kicking off. We've got Jackson Hole, Wyoming, with the Fed meeting right now on the recession and inflationary numbers. But I just wanted to get your take on Kamala Harris, because unbelievable sort of bombshell this past week when she comes out and announces that she's going to, when she's elected president, price controls, like communist era price controls, is what she's going to employ to get these companies from stop charging you so much money when you go to the grocery store. What did you think initially when you heard this?
It absolutely has to be the dumbest idea I've ever heard. I mean, you just have to crack open a history book and you can go back and look at every country who's ever tried it, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because you're controlling one part of the price equation, which is the top price, the price you and I pay for goods and services. So if I stop companies being able to increase their prices, but their cost of goods continue to increase, then at some point they don't make any money, they go out of business. Or like we saw in the 70s, the government comes to their senses and says, oh my gosh, we can't continue this price controls because everybody's going to go out of business. So we're going to stop the price controls. And then what happens? Prices go completely out of control because now they have to make up for the lost ground to stay in business, and prices just skyrocketed. In the 70s, we had inflation up around 15%. So
we've got
just an incredible.
We've got shopping centres as empty as that as well.
Stupid idea that's not going to work. It's going to make matters much, much worse. The other part that I will say is she's concentrating on the wrong problem. The definition of inflation forever and still is too much money chasing too few goods. They caused too much money to be printed. Now you have that too much money chasing the too few goods. That's the cause of inflation. If you want to concentrate on the problem, you got to slow down the money supply a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Look, love, it's your favorite.
Oh, yeah.
Your Porto Family Burger Meal. 2 single Bondi burgers, 2 kids burgers, family-sized chips and drinks. Just $34.95. Porto. Oh, yeah.
Partner with us to have global business consultants help you confidently face the future.
Couple of things to unpack there. I think what you said was brilliant, specifically on the prices, going back to the 1970s. And if you look at grocery stores, she's really been focusing on grocery stores. She's really trying to be relatable, on these speeches. She's like, I know it. You go to buy bacon, it's just more expensive. You go to buy milk, I see it, as if she's trying to distance herself from the past 3.5 years. But grocery stores specifically, they operate on a 1 to 2% net margin. My father used to run a grocery store. He owned a grocery store. They didn't make very much money, and they can't survive if their suppliers raise prices. So the government announces that food producers, you have these big food producers like ConAgra and Tyson and Hormel, they aren't going to be allowed to raise any sort of prices. So not all grocery stores, they're not going to survive at all. You have these very minimal net margins that they have actually survive on. This idea that grocery stores are just jacking up the prices, it's ridiculous.
Well, look, grocery stores don't live on high margins. Farmers don't live on high margins. The chicken has no idea how much the food costs, right? They're putting out an egg that's up 20%. It's not the chicken that's the problem. It's too much money chasing too few goods, and the cost of everything to get that food to the chicken, to keep the chicken in a cage, to get the egg to the market with gasoline and a truck and so on and so forth. All of that's gone up. And she's saying, hey, look, I'm just going to stop the price of the egg going up. It's not the problem. It's the money that's chasing the egg and all the other goods and services that come along with it to get it to market. That's the problem. So this just does not work. It hasn't worked in history. It's not going to work here. And if she does the price controls, you will have a worse inflation problem, just like we had in the 70s in 9-10 months when she releases the price controls.
We also had the Biden administration a few months ago changing the definition of recession, right? They changed the definition so that we can't call it a recession. And they even changed the Wikipedia page for the word recession. And now that page is locked. It's hilarious. If you just move the goalpost on what it means to be in a recession. Do you think we are in a recession or a depression? And how, if not, do you think it's going to get better or worse in the next few months?
Well, first of all, they've been changing the definition of words and the formulas for words all the time. And they've changed the definition and the words for inflation or the formula for inflation for years now, just to try to keep inflation down. So if you went back to the old formula, inflation would still be at 9 to 11%, depending on which formula you're using from the old days. But everyone's talking about recession, no recession. It makes absolutely no sense. People have to wake up here. There is a recession coming. I'm not sure we're in it yet, but we're extremely close. Number one, you've got an indicator that's been 100% accurate for 100 years, which is an inverted yield curve. That inverted yield curve can't tell me exactly when the recession is coming, but it's a 100% chance that there is one coming, and it's fairly soon. The second is not only do you have these indicators out there starting to fall off a cliff, but you have the IMF, which is it's kind of independent, at least, looks at all countries. They're forecasting U.S. economic growth of 2.6% for 2024, which is off by about 0.1%. But next year, it's off by 26%. So they're forecasting 1.9% economic growth. That's a 26% difference in growth. That's a recession, and it's coming. Now, look, I'm in the world of precious metals, so everybody says, well, you're probably kind of a little bit negative on the economy because of precious metals. Well, first of all, they've been outperforming the stock market since 2000, so it doesn't matter if there was a recession or not. This money printing is causing the price of precious metals to increase. But here's a guy, Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, that says, and I quote, I've been pointing to geopolitics, housing, deficits, spending, quantitative tightening, all these things could cause some consternation in the markets. I give a 35 to 40% chance that we will have a soft landing. Meaning, if you think of it the opposite way, he's giving it about a 60% chance that we're going to have a recession. I keep saying, look, if you gave me a parachute and the guy says, look, there's a 60% chance the parachute isn't going to open, I'm not jumping out of the plane. Right. But these are your retirement. This is people's retirement and their savings. And you have, based on what he's saying, a 60% chance that there's going to be some problems in the economy, over the next 12 to 18 months. So it's a guy I'd listen to when he's talking about things like recession, because he's not in the business of wanting a recession when you own a large bank.
Well, I always say here and then on my other channel, talking about investing, it's like, God, my wife and I, we have our IRAs, we have our children's IRAs, our self-directed IRAs, and they're, heavy with precious metals and real estate. Like that's what we invest in, tangible assets, which has outpaced inflation. So that's something we talk about all the time. And then the Fed, of course, is meeting right now in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And I want to get your take on this, Kevin. They're going to be talking about a recession, whether or not we're in one, whether we can protect ourselves from getting to one. Slashing of interest rates here in September, it seems likely that that's going to happen. We even see maybe a couple interest rate slashings over the course of the next couple of months. So what do you think that will do to the economy right ahead of the election? It's like giving a gift, I think, to Kamala Harris for the election by the Fed slashing these interest rates. And also the U.S. dollar, the big de-dollarization process right now. I mean, BRICS countries, they're dumping the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency of the world, and they're partnering with themselves, saying we're done being bullied by the United States and the U.S. dollar. So what do you think we're going to see out of this Fed meeting, and what's your sense as we head into the fall?
Yeah, that's a great question. Jerome Powell's kind of walking a tightrope. So on one hand, he's got the U.S. economy going into a recession soon, if I had to guess. So he's thinking about lowering interest rates to try to keep that from happening. And on the other side, he's got enormous amounts of central banks liquidating dollars and purchasing other assets, a lot of gold right now, but they're liquidating the U.S. dollar into the economy, into the market, which could cause a lot of inflation. So if he lowers interest rates here in the U.S. too much, then those central banks who are already selling are going to sell more. Those dollars are going to come to the United States. And again, the definition of inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. Those dollars chase goods, the inflation rate stays higher. So he's got a real tightrope here. They put themselves in this position, Clayton, by printing up so much money. It's just unbelievable, right? We're drowning in a record $35 trillion in debt with interest payments this year, almost at $1 trillion. We're borrowing $2.5 trillion just to pay the interest on the debt. So,
wow,
interest
that's
rates will help
stunning.
that out, but it's not going to help these central banks selling dollars, which could cause even more inflation. So he's got a really kind of a tough situation to try to maneuver through. I feel like we're in the cartoon with, the Road Runner and Wile E. Coyote, where, Wile E. runs off the cliff and he's just hanging there. And then, he drops to the bottom. We're waiting for the drop to the bottom here.
It's really troubling. And, the de-dollarization continues. So they can do all they want, talk about inflation. Kamala can talk about putting in a housing. We're going to talk a little bit later in the show tonight about her housing plan, which is just a ripoff of Soviet-era style housing, like what Justin Trudeau has done up in Canada, a disaster. So they're going to just throw billions more of dollars into this mix while these other countries are just running away from the U.S. dollar. How scared are you? Like once all of these countries back away from the U.S. dollar, where are those U.S. dollars that they're dumping? Where are they going to go?
Yeah, it's a great question. You look right now, and I had this statistic right before the show here. It says the share of U.S. dollar reserves held by central banks fell to 58.4%, the lowest since 1999. On average, it was right around 80%. So this has fallen by 25%. People ask me, why is this important? Why are you so nervous about these countries selling dollars? Those dollars go someplace and they come back to the United States. So I make this example for people. If you took Apple shares and there was $1 billion worth of Apple shares, and you got $1 billion worth of Apple shares, 500 billion here in the United, or 500 million here in the United States, and 500 million outside the United States, that for 50 years basically hasn't been sold. That's the world reserve currency. And those, let's say they're Apple shares. And after 50 years, those central banks that own those Apple shares say, hey, look, I'm just going to liquidate the Apple shares. I don't want them anymore. What happens to the value of Apple? It's going to crash 50%. So more money is held outside, more U.S. currency is held outside the United States than inside the United States. One big reason is because of the petrodollar. All countries have to use the U.S. dollar to go buy oil. And the Saudis have said, basically, I don't know if I want to continue with this petrodollar situation. We might want to work with the BRICS countries, so on and so forth. If those countries don't have to hold those dollars and they start liquidating them, what happens to the value of the dollar here in the United States when you flood the market with those dollars? It's going to be the same thing that if you flood You know, the Apple shares that these central banks were holding back into the economy. Apple crashes, the dollar crashes. It's the scariest part of the entire economy to me. It's my most worrisome thing that keeps me up at night, because you can't do anything about it. These banks can sell. There's not a darn thing we can do about it, and all of those dollars coming back would take the inflation rate absolutely through the roof. So again, Powell has a big tightrope situation that he's got to figure out how to maneuver around so that these countries don't liquidate.
They box themselves in on this. I mean, and again, we saw what happened with Japan. Last year, we bullied them into not selling their U.S. treasuries. You know, no, fine. We're just hang on to them in Japan. Now we know what a disaster that's been for them holding on to these bunk assets right now, the U.S. dollar. It's been a disaster. Kevin, you guys put together a great report at Lear. I've read it. I sent it to a bunch of friends as well. The de-dollarization report that you guys put together, and you guys have made it available for our audience. I'd love for you to share it with them if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so we put a report together on the debt, de-dollarization, interest rates, and inflation. So just people to get educated a little bit here. What are the things that they can invest in if the dollar is going to fall, if inflation is going to stay higher for a little bit longer, or if interest rates start to come down? What are some alternatives? You brought up precious metals and real estate. Look, you can print up a bunch of dollars, but you can't print gold and you can't print real estate. So those types of assets, those hard assets, are going to be some of the alternatives that people may want to look at, and that's what the report's going to go through. They can give us a phone call and get this report absolutely free. It's about 16, 18 pages long. Also, if they call or use the URL at learredacted.com, we're going to put $250 into their account automatically. If they purchase gold or silver, they can use it for their IRAs, for all the IRA fees that the custodian charges. We'll cover that for them, or free shipping and insurance if they want home delivery. So if they give us a phone call at 800-613-3557, 800-613-3557, or go to learredacted.com. We'll get the report out there, put the $250 into their account, and hopefully get them a little educated on what we think at least is happening out there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting. We've got the Jackson Hole meeting.
Yo, Martha, what are you doing? You mean cooking a turkey? It's simple with my Bic Easy Reach Lighter. We should try this Bic Easy Reach Lighter with our favorite activity. You mean Bic Easy Reach, the ultimate lighter.
Hello, brothers and sisters.
Okay, guys, I'm out. See you tomorrow. I'm going to do Martin Luther's Reformation. It's a good movie. Okay, guys, see you tomorrow. God bless.